Damian Blackthorne's life had always been a roller coaster. A man who had everything, yet at the same time, nothing. Billions in the bank, gleaming cars, and a name that opened doors before he even knocked. But something was missing. Something no amount of money in the world could buy. And now, about to walk down the aisle with Evelyn Ashford, a socialite as dazzling as a brand new chandelier, he felt it more than ever. Evelyn was the kind of woman who knew exactly how to behave in any situation, always with a calculated smile, a flawless dress, and words that sounded too rehearsed to be real. Not that Damian was naive. He knew this marriage wasn't about love. It was about power, about status, about two empires merging to create something even bigger. But there was a part of him, buried deep down, that longed for something more. It was in this whirlwind of thoughts that he made a decision that would change everything. An impulsive decision, perhaps even childish. He decided to invite Isabella Montgomery to the wedding. Yes, that Isabella, the woman he had loved with all his heart years ago. The same woman who had disappeared without explanation, leaving behind only a short, cold letter saying that it just wouldn't work. "Why am I doing this?" he murmured to himself as he wrote the invitation by hand. It wasn't like he needed more drama in his life, but there was something there. A flicker of revenge? Maybe, or maybe just curiosity. He wanted to see her again. He wanted to see if she was still the same Isabella he remembered. And, above all, he wanted her to see how far he had come, how he had built an empire, while he had no idea what she had been doing these past years. On the other side of the city, Isabella sat in her kitchen, surrounded by the usual chaos of 3 small children running back and forth. Olivia, Oliver, and Owen, triplets, 3 tiny hurricanes that turned any normal day into an adventure. She looked down at the golden envelope in her hands and sighed. She knew exactly what it meant. Damian Blackthorne was about to get married, and for some inexplicable reason, he wanted her there. "Are you going, Mommy?" Olivia asked, tugging at her sleeve with wide eyes. Isabella smiled, but it was a tired smile. How do you explain to a 6-year-old that the adult world is complicated? That sometimes people hurt each other without meaning to? That sometimes you have to make hard choices to protect the ones you love? "I don't know, sweetheart," she answered, stroking her daughter's hair. Maybe, but deep down, she already knew she would go. Not because she wanted to confront Damian or prove anything to him, but because she needed to close this chapter of her life once and for all. Because, as much as it hurt to admit, a part of her still wondered what it would be like to see him again. What it would be like to look into the eyes of the man she had loved so much. The man she had to leave behind. The following days were a blur of preparations. Isabella knew bringing the triplets would be risky. They were small, yes, but also smart. Too smart. And there was something about them, something in their eyes, in the way they smiled, that screamed Blackthorne to anyone paying close attention. But she couldn't just leave them behind. They were her life, her everything. Meanwhile, Damian could barely sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Isabella's face. The way she used to laugh when he said something silly. The way her eyes sparkled in the sunlight. He tried to convince himself that he was doing this to prove a point, to show her that he had moved on. But deep down, he knew it was more than that. It was as if a part of him still hoped she would show up and say it had all been a big misunderstanding. And then, finally, the big day arrived. The hall was packed, flowers everywhere, soft music playing in the background. And there he was, Damian Blackthorne, standing at the altar, looking as confident as a man could be. Until the door opened, Isabella walked in, and she wasn't alone. The murmurs started low, but quickly grew into a loud buzz. Damian felt the ground disappear beneath his feet. There they were, 3 children, perfect little copies of him. The same piercing blue eyes, the same dark hair, the same mischievous smile. How had he not realized it before? How had he not seen it? The silence in the hall was palpable. Even Evelyn, who always had a ready response for everything, seemed at a loss for words. Damian looked at Isabella, and for the first time in years, he saw something he hadn't expected to see. Fear, guilt, and maybe, just maybe, a little bit of hope. The hall was silent, one of those heavy silences where even the sound of a pin dropping would be deafening. Damian felt as if he had been hit by a truck. He couldn't take his eyes off the children, 3 pairs of blue eyes that seemed to reflect his very soul. It was like looking at his own reflection, but in miniature. How had he not realized it before? How had he not done the math? Isabella, on the other hand, was trying to stay calm. She knew this moment would come. She knew that, sooner or later, Damian would find out. But she never imagined it would be like this, in the middle of a wedding, in front of hundreds of people. It was as if the universe was determined to turn her life into a bizarre reality show. Damian, she began, but he raised his hand, cutting her off. His expression was a mix of shock, anger, and something deeper, something he couldn't name yet. "Are you going to explain this to me?" he asked, his voice low but carrying an intensity that made Isabella shiver. He pointed at the children, who now stood beside her, watching everything with childish curiosity. "Who are they?" Isabella took a deep breath. She knew there was no escaping now. "They're your children," she said simply, as if she were announcing the weather. But the words fell over the hall like a bomb. The guests began whispering. Some looked shocked, others fascinated. Evelyn, the abandoned bride at the altar, was pale, clutching her bouquet, so tightly that her knuckles turned white. She looked at Damian, waiting for him to say something, anything, to deny the absurd accusation. But he said nothing. He just kept staring at Isabella and the children, as if trying to process everything. "My children?" Damian finally repeated, his voice filled with disbelief. How is that possible?" Isabella sighed. Exhausted. "You know exactly how that's possible, Damian. I left 6 years ago. They're 6 years old. Do the math." The words were blunt, but there was an underlying pain in them, a pain she had been carrying alone for too long. Damian could see it now. He could see it in the lines around her eyes, in the way she held the children's hands, as if they were her only anchor in a world threatening to collapse at any moment. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, his voice faltering. "Why did you keep this from me?" Isabella shook her head, as if the question was so obvious it didn't even need an answer. "Do you really want to know why?" she shot back, her voice rising. "Do you really think I would have chosen to stay away from you if I had another option?" Damian frowned, confused. "What are you talking about?" But before Isabella could respond, Olivia, the most talkative of the triplets, decided it was time to join the conversation. "Mommy, who is that man?" she asked, pointing at Damian with the blunt honesty only children have. All eyes turned to the little girl. Damian felt his chest tighten. She was so small, so innocent. And now he was standing there, being introduced as a complete stranger to his own children. The irony of the situation didn't go unnoticed. "He's a friend," Isabella answered hesitantly. "An old friend. Sorry, Mom, but he looks like more than just a friend." Owen, the quietest of the 3, muttered, crossing his arms. He had definitely inherited someone's sarcasm. Despite the tension, Damian couldn't help but smile briefly. There was something about the children, the way they spoke, the way they looked at him, that made him feel an instant connection. It was as if he already knew them, even though he had never seen them before. "Look, I know this is complicated," Isabella continued, trying to regain control of the situation, "but this isn't the time or place for this conversation. We need to leave." She was right, of course. The hall was turning into a circus. The guests were taking pictures, sending frantic messages, speculating about what was happening. Damian could see reporters trying to get in, sniffing out the scandal. It was only a matter of time before the story was everywhere. "You're not going anywhere," Damian said firmly. "Not until you explain everything to me." Isabella looked at him, frustrated. "You don't understand, Damian. This isn't a conversation we can have here. Not in front of everyone. Not in front of the children." But Damian wasn't about to let her walk away again. He had spent 6 years not knowing he had children. 6 years believing Isabella had abandoned him without reason. He wasn't going to let her slip away now. "Then let's talk somewhere private," he insisted. Now, Isabella hesitated. She knew there was no avoiding this. She knew that, sooner or later, Damian would learn the whole truth. But she also knew that the truth could change everything. It could destroy lives. It could put everything she had fought to protect at risk. "Fine," she finally agreed, reluctantly. "But the children come with me." Damian nodded. He wasn't going to argue about that. Not when he had just found a part of himself he hadn't even known was missing. The car was silent, but it was a heavy silence, filled with unspoken questions and unanswered truths. Damian stared out the window, trying to organize his thoughts, but his mind was a whirlwind. He could feel the children's eyes on him, curious, evaluating. It was as if they were trying to decide whether he was a friend or an enemy. And Isabella, she was too quiet, which only made the tension in the air worse. So, Damian finally broke the silence. "Are you going to explain to me why I'm the father of 3 kids and never knew about it?" Isabella sighed, as if she had rehearsed this conversation 1,000 times in her head, but still didn't know where to start. "It's not as simple as it seems, Damian." "Oh, of course," he shot back with a bitter laugh. "Because nothing in my life is ever simple, right? You disappear, show up 6 years later with 3 kids that are clearly mine, and now you want me to believe you have a good explanation for this?" She met his gaze, her eyes filled with a mix of guilt and frustration. "Do you think this was easy for me? Do you think I wanted this? I had to make tough decisions, Damian. Decisions you can't even imagine." "Then help me imagine," he snapped, his voice rising. "Help me understand why you kept me out of this. Why you took away my chance to be a father." The triplets exchanged worried glances in the back seat. They could feel that something big was happening, something beyond their understanding. Olivia, always the bravest, decided to step in. "Mommy, who is this man again?" she asked, this time with less confidence. Isabella hesitated before answering. He's someone important, sweetheart. Someone I knew a long time ago." Damian scoffed, irritated. "Important? That's how you're going to introduce me? As someone important? How do you want me to introduce you, Damian?" Isabella shot back, her patience wearing thin. "As the father who was never there? As the man I loved and had to leave because I had no other choice?" That last sentence hit Damian like a punch to the gut. "Choice? What choice? You never gave me a chance to choose." "I did what I had to do," she yelled, her voice shaking with emotion. "You don't understand what I went through, Damian. You have no idea what I sacrificed to protect these children." The car came to a stop in front of a small, discreet cafe, far from the prying eyes of the press. Isabella quickly got out, holding the children's hands. Damian followed, still furious but also confused. What did she mean by sacrifice? What could have been so serious that it justified all of this? Inside the cafe, they found a quiet table in the back, where they could talk without being disturbed. The children, sensing the seriousness of the situation, remained silent. Something rare for them. Isabella ordered hot chocolate for the triplets and black coffee for herself. Damian didn't even look at the menu. Protect them from what? He asked, his voice lower now but still filled with urgency. What are you talking about, Isabella? She glanced at the children, hesitant. She knew this conversation would change everything, but she also knew there was no turning back now. From people who didn't want us to be together, she finally said, choosing her words carefully. People who made threats against my family. Against me. Damian frowned, trying to make sense of it. What kind of threats? Isabella lowered her gaze, avoiding his eyes. Threats that forced me to leave you. Threats that made me believe it was safer for you to never know about the triplets. Damian sat in the cafe, trying to absorb everything Isabella had said. It felt like the ground beneath his feet was shifting, and he no longer knew what to believe. Threats? Against her family? He had always known Isabella came from a complicated background. She had never hidden that, but he had never imagined things were serious enough to tear them apart forever. Who were these people? Damian asked, his voice low, almost a whisper. He didn't want to scare the kids, but he needed to know. And why didn't you tell me any of this? Isabella looked down at her hands, avoiding his gaze. She seemed to be battling herself, trying to decide how much she could reveal. Finally, she sighed and began to speak. It was my family, Damian. My own family. They had plans for me. Plans that didn't include you. He frowned, confused. Plans? What kind of plans? She hesitated, choosing her words carefully. You know how my family is traditional. They never accepted our relationship. To them, you were just an ambitious businessman, someone who didn't fit their standards. When they found out about the pregnancy, they were furious. Pregnancy? Damian repeated, shocked. You knew you were pregnant when you left? Isabella nodded, her eyes glistening with tears. Yes, I found out right before I left, but they gave me an ultimatum. Either I broke up with you and disappeared from your life, or they would find a way to destroy you. Not just you, but any chance of happiness I might have. The triplets, sensing the weight of the conversation, began shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Olivia, always the most observant, looked at Damian and then at Isabella. Mommy, why are you crying? She asked, worried. Isabella forced a smile and quickly wiped her eyes. I'm okay, sweetheart. Just old memories. But Damian wasn't convinced. He could see the pain on her face, the same pain he had felt when he received that goodbye letter years ago. Now he was finally starting to understand why. So, you left me to protect me? He asked, incredulous. Do you think that makes sense? That abandoning everything was better than facing this together? I didn't have a choice. Isabella snapped, her voice trembling. You don't understand. They had power, Damian. Real power. They could have ruined you, your company, your reputation. They would have done it without hesitation. I couldn't let that happen. Damian shook his head, frustrated. You should have trusted me, Isabella. We could have found a way. Together, she scoffed, laughing bitterly. Do you really think there was a way? Do you think your money or influence could have stopped my family? They are ruthless, Damian. They would have destroyed everything you built, and then they would have come after me. And the babies, the weight of her words hit Damian like a brick. He had never thought of it that way. He had always seen the world as something he could control, manipulate, dominate. But now, for the first time, he realized there were things beyond his reach. Things that not even all the money in the world could fix. And what did you do after? He asked, his voice softer now. After you left? Isabella took a deep breath, as if reliving every moment of those difficult years. I ran. I ran far away from everything and everyone. I changed cities, changed my name. I tried to start over, but they were always there, Damian, always watching me, reminding me of what I had lost, until the triplets were born, and everything changed. The children, realizing they were the center of the conversation, began shifting uneasily. Oliver, the most curious of the three, decided to speak up. "Mommy, why didn't you ever talk about our dad before?" Isabella looked at her children, her heart aching. How could she explain to them that the man sitting at the table was the father they had never known? That the whole story was far more complicated than it seemed? Because it was safer that way, she said hesitantly. But now things are different. Damian studied the children, seeing parts of himself in them that he had never noticed before. The same gestures, the same expressions. It was like looking into a mirror, but from a new perspective. He knew he had to fix this. He had to find a way to make things right. Damian couldn't sleep. Isabella's words echoed in his mind like a broken record, repeating over and over again. He had spent years thinking she left him by choice, out of selfishness or lack of love. But now he knew there was something much bigger behind that decision. Something involving blackmail, power, and a family willing to do anything to maintain appearances. "I need to know the truth," he murmured to himself, sitting in the darkness of his office. It was late at night, but he couldn't relax. His mind was racing, trying to piece together the puzzle that was Isabella's past, and he knew exactly where to start. The next day, Damian hired a private investigator, someone with an impeccable reputation and sharp skills. "I want to know everything about the Montgomery family," he ordered, his voice firm. "Everything they've done in the last 10 years. Business dealings, threats, anything that can help me understand what happened." The investigator, a grizzled man with sharp eyes, nodded. "It'll take some time, but I'll find what you need." While waiting for the information, Damian began reflecting on his own life. He had always been a man used to controlling everything around him, his empire, his decisions, his future. But now, for the first time, he realized there were things beyond his control, things he had never considered before. "You're different," Evelyn remarked, appearing unexpectedly in the doorway of his office. She was still hurt by what had happened at the wedding, but there was something in her expression that suggested genuine concern. "What's going on, Damian?" He hesitated before answering. He didn't want to involve Evelyn in this, but he also knew he couldn't just ignore her. "I'm trying to understand some things from my past," he finally said, choosing his words carefully. "Things I buried a long time ago." Evelyn frowned, suspicious. "Does this have anything to do with that woman?" With Isabella? Damian didn't respond directly. Instead, he changed the subject. "Evelyn, I need you to understand that things are complicated right now. I need to figure this out before I can think about anything else." She sighed, clearly frustrated. "You know I'm not good at waiting, right? I don't like being pushed aside while you sort out your problems." "I know," he admitted, his voice softer now. "But this is something I need to do alone." The following days were an emotional roller coaster. The investigator began sending detailed reports on the Montgomery family, and each new piece of information made Damian question everything he thought he knew. There were records of shady financial transactions, mysterious phone calls, and even rumors that the family had used unconventional methods to protect their interests. "These people are dangerous," the investigator warned during a meeting. "They won't like knowing you're digging into their past." Damian shook his head, resolute. "I don't care. I need to know the truth." Among the documents was an old letter, one Isabella had received shortly before she disappeared. It was a direct threat, written in clear terms. "If you don't stay away from him, the consequences will be severe." Damian felt a tightness in his chest as he read those words. Now, he understood why Isabella had made the decision she did. She had been trying to protect him and the triplets. But there was something else in the reports that caught his attention. A name he recognized immediately: Charles Blackthorne, his own father. It seemed the Montgomery family had done business with the Blackthornes in the past, and not all of those dealings had been ethical. Damian started to wonder if his own family knew more than they were letting on. "You think my father knew about this?" he asked the investigator, his voice filled with urgency. "It's possible," the man replied cautiously, "but proving it will be difficult." Damian knew he had to confront his family. He needed to find out if they had betrayed his trust and Isabella's for money or power. It was time to face some ghosts from the past. Damian was sitting in the Blackthorne Mansion's conference room, the place where so many important decisions had been made over the years. But today, the atmosphere was different. Heavy, tense. He had called a family meeting, something he hadn't done in years. And now everyone was there, looking at him with expressions ranging from curiosity to suspicion. "Why are we here, Damian?" his mother, Margaret, asked, her tone a mix of impatience and concern. She had always been the one to keep up appearances, the perfect matriarch who hated anything that disrupted the family's carefully laid plans. "Is this really necessary?" "Necessary?" "Yes," Damian replied, his voice firm but controlled. He knew he had to choose his words carefully. "I need to know if any of you had anything to do with Isabella Montgomery." The name hung in the air like a storm cloud. All eyes turned to Charles Blackthorne, the family patriarch, who sat at the head of the table, impassive. He raised an eyebrow, as if evaluating whether this conversation was worth his time. "Isabella Montgomery," he repeated slowly, as if trying to recall who she was. "That girl you used to date? What about her?" "Don't pretend you don't know, Dad." Damian shot back, his patience wearing thin. "The Montgomerys did business with our family in the past. Questionable business. And now I've discovered that they threatened Isabella to make her leave me. I want to know if you knew about it." Charles crossed his arms, clearly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. "That's old business, Damian. I don't see why it needs to be brought up now." "Old business?" Damian repeated, incredulous. "This isn't just old business, Dad. This is my life. My children. 3 kids I didn't even know existed until a few days ago." The room fell silent. Even Margaret looked surprised by the revelation. "Children," she murmured, as if processing the information. "You have children?" "Yes, Mother. 3. With Isabella," Damian confirmed, his voice laced with frustration. "And all of this happened because someone decided it was better if I never knew they existed. Someone who probably cared more about the family's interests than about my happiness." Charles sighed, finally relenting. "All right, Damian, let's lay everything out on the table. Yes, we did business with the Montgomerys in the past. And yes, there were certain pressures. But that was a long time ago. We had no idea Isabella was pregnant. If you had known what?" Damian interrupted, his voice rising. "Would you have done anything differently? Would you have told me the truth? Or would you have kept hiding it all to protect your precious business deals?" Charles didn't respond immediately. He just looked at Damian, as if deciding whether it was worth continuing the argument. Finally, he said, "You've always been impulsive, Damian. Always chasing what you think is right without considering the consequences. We believed we were protecting you. Protecting or controlling?" Damian shot back, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Because to me, it looks like you were only thinking about yourselves." Margaret, sensing the situation was spiraling out of control, tried to intervene. "Damian, sweetheart, you have to understand that sometimes the decisions we make aren't easy. We always wanted what was best for you." "What was best for me?" he repeated, laughing bitterly. The best thing for me would have been knowing I had 3 children. The best thing for me would have been the chance to build a family with the woman I loved. But you took that away from me. You and the Montgomerys. The tension in the room was palpable. Damian could feel the weight of his words, but he also knew there was no turning back now. He had to face this. Face all of them before he could move forward. I won't live like this anymore, he declared, his voice steady. I won't let you control my life any longer. I have a family now. A family I didn't even know existed until recently. And I'll do whatever it takes to protect them. With that, Damian stood up and walked out of the room, leaving his parents in silence. He knew that conversation would have repercussions, but he also knew it was the first step toward taking back control of his own life. The following days were a whirlwind for Damian. He was torn between 2 worlds. The one he had always known, money, power, control, and the one that now felt more real, more important. A life with Isabella and the triplets. He knew he had to make a decision, but each choice carried its own weight. Evelyn, his abandoned fiancée, wasn't making things any easier. She showed up at his apartment door one morning, furious and determined. You're making a huge mistake, Damian, she said bluntly. This is just a distraction. You're going to regret it. Damian sighed, tired of the accusations. Evelyn, I can't pretend this didn't happen anymore. I have children. 3 kids I never knew existed. How do you expect me to just ignore that? I'm not asking you to ignore it. Evelyn shot back, her voice rising. But you need to think about the future, about what really matters. That woman, that family, they're going to drag you down. You know that. He shook his head, frustrated. You don't understand, Evelyn. This isn't about me. It's about them, Isabella, and the triplets. They are my family now. Evelyn scoffed, clearly irritated. Your family? You barely know them. How can you even call it that? This is just an old fling coming back to haunt you. Something inside Damian ignited. Don't talk about her like that. Isabella did what she thought was best to protect our children. She sacrificed everything for them. And I'm going to do the same. Evelyn's expression shifted from anger to something darker. So, you've already made your choice, haven't you? You're choosing them over me. Damian hesitated, but he knew there was no turning back now. Yes, Evelyn, I'm sorry, but this is something I have to do. She stared at him for a long moment before turning around and storming out, slamming the door behind her. Damian stood there, feeling the weight of the choice he had just made. He knew this would have consequences. Evelyn wasn't the kind of person to accept defeat easily, but he also knew it was the right thing to do. Meanwhile, Isabella was dealing with her own turmoil. She knew Damian was trying, that he wanted to make things right, but a part of her still resisted. A part of her feared that he would leave again, just as she had been forced to do years ago. Do you think he's going to stay? Olivia asked as they prepared dinner together. The children had started to sense that something big was happening, something that involved Damian. Isabella hesitated before answering. I don't know, sweetheart, but I hope so. Olivia frowned, deep in thought. He seems nice, different from the other dads I see at school. Isabella smiled, surprised by her daughter's observation. Different how? He seems genuine, Olivia replied carefully, like he really wants to be here. Those words stayed with Isabella for the rest of the night. She knew Damian was trying, but she also knew that rebuilding trust would take time. Time she wasn't sure he was willing to invest. The next day, Damian showed up at Isabella's doorstep with a bouquet of flowers and a determined look on his face. We need to talk, he said bluntly. Isabella let him in, but kept a cautious distance. What is it, Damian? I made a decision, he began, his voice firm but gentle. I ended things with Evelyn. I can't move forward with something that isn't real. Not when I know my real family is here. Isabella felt a tightness in her chest. Part of her wanted to believe him, but another part was still afraid. And what does that mean? Exactly? What are you saying? I'm saying I want to be part of their lives, Damian replied, glancing toward the triplets playing in the other room. I want to be the father they deserve. I want to fix things with you. If you'll give me a chance. His words hung in the air for a moment, heavy with meaning. Isabella knew this was a rare opportunity, a chance to rebuild something she thought had been lost forever. But she also knew it wouldn't be easy. You understand this won't be simple, right? She asked, her voice trembling. Trust isn't earned overnight. I know, Damian admitted, his eyes sincere. But I'm willing to do whatever it takes. For them. For you. The days that followed were a mix of tension and hope. Damian was determined to prove to Isabella and to himself that he was capable of change. He knew that merely saying he wanted to be part of the triplets' lives wasn't enough. He had to act, and that's exactly what he did. I want them to know who I am, Damian told Isabella during a quiet conversation in the kitchen. Not just as a father, but as a person. I want them to trust me. Isabella watched him for a moment, trying to gauge his sincerity. You know this will take time, right? The kids, they're smart. They notice everything. I know, Damian replied, his voice soft but firm. And I'm willing to wait. If it takes years, then so be it. But I'm going to do this the right way. The first steps were small but meaningful. Damian started showing up at Isabella's house more often, bringing little gifts for the triplets. Books, toys, even a soccer ball that quickly became Owen's favorite. He also began helping with daily tasks, something he had never done before. From assisting with breakfast to joining their bedtime story sessions, he was making an effort to integrate himself into their routine. You're getting better at this, Isabella remarked one evening as they watched the triplets play in the backyard. They're starting to like you. Damian smiled, but there was a hint of vulnerability in his expression. I just want them to know they can count on me, that I won't disappear. Isabella nodded, feeling a weight lift off her shoulders. It was as if she was finally allowing herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, things could work out this time. But not everything was easy. Evelyn, still furious over Damian's decision, decided to retaliate. She leaked sensitive business information to the press, creating a scandal that threatened to destroy his reputation. The headlines were brutal. Billionaire loses control of empire amid family drama, and Damian Blackthorne. The fall of a tycoon, how could she do this? Isabella asked, worried, as she read the news on her phone. This could really hurt you. Damian sighed, frustrated but surprisingly calm. She's trying to hit me where it hurts. But you know what? I don't care anymore. Not the way I used to. But what about your company? Your business? Isabella asked, disbelief in her voice. My company will survive, Damian said with a conviction that surprised even himself. And if it doesn't, well, maybe it's time to rethink my priorities. That statement left Isabella speechless. She had always known Damian to be ambitious, someone who lived and breathed success. But now, for the first time, she saw a man willing to give it all up for what truly mattered. To show he was serious, Damian made a bold decision. He announced that he would donate a significant portion of his fortune to charities Isabella supported, organizations focused on helping children and families in need. It was a grand gesture, something that caught the attention of both the media and the public. Why are you doing this? Isabella asked, her voice thick with emotion when she heard the news. Because it's the right thing to do, Damian replied simply. And because I want you to see that I mean it. About us, about the triplets, about this new life I want to build. The children, in turn, started to see Damian in a different light. He was no longer just the stranger who showed up occasionally. He was becoming part of their everyday lives. Olivia began asking him for advice about school. Oliver challenged him to video game matches, and Owen followed him around everywhere, as if Damian were his personal hero. "You're cool, Dad," Owen said one afternoon while they played soccer at the park. It was the first time he had used the word *Dad*, and Damian felt a lump form in his throat. "Thanks, champ," Damian replied, trying to keep his voice steady. "I just want to be the best dad I can be for you guys." But despite all the progress, Isabella still hesitated. There was something inside her, a barrier she couldn't completely tear down. She knew Damian was trying, but she also knew that rebuilding something so fragile required more than grand gestures or heartfelt promises. "I want to believe you, Damian," she confessed one night as they talked on the porch. "But I'm still scared that this is just a phase." Damian took her hands in his, looking straight into her eyes. "I understand your fear, Isabella, and I can't erase the past, but I can promise you one thing. I won't give up. Not on you, not on them." The days turned into weeks, and Damian remained resolute in his mission to rebuild his bonds with Isabella and the triplets. He knew there were no shortcuts to forgiveness, but he also knew that every small victory was a step in the right direction. Slowly, he began to see changes, not only in the way the children treated him, but also in Isabella's gaze. One afternoon, while the triplets played in the backyard, Damian and Isabella sat on the porch, enjoying the cool air and the tranquility of the moment. It was one of those rare pauses when the world seemed to stop and they could simply breathe. "I wanted to apologize," Damian began, his voice soft, almost hesitant, "for everything, for not realizing what you were going through back then, for being so selfish." Isabella stared at him for a moment, surprised by the sincerity of his words. "You can't change the past, Damian. None of us can, but I can learn from it," Damian replied quickly, his eyes locked with hers. "And I have. I've learned that being strong doesn't mean never needing help, that sometimes the greatest act of courage is asking for forgiveness." Isabella felt a tightness in her chest. She had always known that Damian was proud, perhaps too proud, but seeing him admit his faults, vulnerable and sincere, was something she had never imagined possible. "You're different," she murmured, more to herself than to him. "I hope so," Damian said with a shy smile, "because I want to be someone you can trust, someone who deserves to be here." There was a silence between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was one of those moments when words weren't necessary, because the weight of what was being said was already clear. "I've always loved you, Isabella," Damian continued, his voice now quieter, almost a whisper. "Even when I thought you had abandoned me, I never could get you out of my head. And now I understand why. You sacrificed everything for our children, and I just want you to know that I'll never forget that." Tears began to fall down Isabella's face before she could try to stop them. She had kept so many emotions inside for so long, anger, pain, guilt, that hearing Damian say those words was like opening a floodgate she hadn't even known was locked. "I loved you too," she admitted, her voice thick. "But I was so scared that they could hurt you. Scared that I wouldn't be strong enough to protect our kids on my own." Damian reached out, holding her hand gently. "You're not alone anymore, Isabella. I'm here now, and I'm not going anywhere." They stayed there for a long moment, just feeling each other's presence, allowing themselves to believe that maybe, just maybe, they could have a future together. The children, sensing that something important was happening, approached timidly. "Daddy," Olivia called hesitantly. "Is Mommy crying?" Damian smiled, quickly wiping away Isabella's tears. "No, sweetheart, she's just happy." Olivia exchanged a look with her siblings, clearly confused, but Oliver decided to intervene. "Then why does she look like she ate a sour lemon?" Everyone laughed, and the tense moment dissolved. Damian pulled the triplets into a group hug, feeling something he had never experienced before, a sense of belonging, of family. "You guys are amazing. Did you know that?" he said, messing up Owen's hair. "Each and every one of you." The triplets smiled, and for the first time, Damian felt like they truly saw him as a father, not as a stranger or an occasional visitor, but as a part of their lives. In the following days, Damian continued to engage more deeply in the family's routine. He started attending school meetings, helping with homework, and even organizing small weekend adventures like a trip to the zoo or an afternoon picnic in the park. Every shared moment was an opportunity to build memories, to create something he had never had as a child, a real family connection. But there were still obstacles. Evelyn, furious with Damian's decision to donate part of his fortune to social causes, decided to take the dispute to another level. She began spreading rumors about him, trying to tarnish his reputation publicly. To many, Damian was becoming a controversial figure, a man who abandoned his empire for a family he barely knew. "You need to face her," Isabella said one evening, worried about the impact this could have on Damian. "She won't stop until she destroys you." Damian shook his head, calm. "Let her talk. In the end, people will see the truth. And if they don't, well, that doesn't matter anymore. What matters is what we have here." The months passed, and Damian, Isabella, and the triplets' lives began to settle into a more stable rhythm. Not that everything was perfect, far from it, but there was something different in the air, a sense of peace none of them had ever experienced before. Damian had finally understood that success wasn't measured by the size of his bank account or the number of headlines with his name, but by the laughter of the children during dinner or the tired but genuine smile on Isabella's face at the end of a long day. "You know," Damian said one evening, as he and Isabella watched the triplets play in the backyard, lit by the soft twilight light, "I never imagined it would be like this." Isabella looked at him, curious. "Like what?" "Happy," Damian replied simply. "Truly, I always thought happiness was something that came with achievements, money, power, status. But this..." He made a vague gesture towards the children, who were now trying to teach Owen how to do somersaults in the grass. "This is something else. It's something I never knew I was missing." Isabella smiled, feeling warmth spread through her chest. She knew exactly what Damian meant. For years, she had carried the weight of raising the triplets alone, convinced it was the only way to protect them. But now, with Damian by her side, she realized she might have been too proud. Maybe she could have asked for help sooner. "I've learned something too," Isabella admitted, her voice soft, almost a whisper. "I've learned that being strong doesn't mean doing everything alone. Sometimes being strong is knowing when to let someone in." Damian stared at her for a moment, surprised by the depth of her words. He had always seen Isabella as a resilient woman, someone who faced the world with unshakable courage. But now, he understood that strength also came from vulnerability, from allowing oneself to trust, even when it seemed impossible. They stayed there for a while, just watching the children, enjoying the tranquility of the moment. It was as if the world outside, with its scandals, pressures, and expectations, had disappeared. All that mattered was right there, in that backyard. But not everything was completely resolved. Evelyn was still determined to drag Damian back into the spotlight. using any means necessary. She managed to convince some of his former business partners to break contracts, causing significant damage to his company. Damian knew he needed to confront her, but this time, he wouldn't do it alone. "I have an idea," Damian said to Isabella one morning as they had coffee together. "What if I used this as an opportunity to show who I really am? To prove that money and power aren't everything?" Isabella furrowed her brow. Intrigued. "What are you thinking?" "I'll call the press," Damian explained, his expression determined. "I'll tell my story. All of it. About the mistakes I made. About how I almost lost the most important thing in my life because I was obsessed with what others thought. And I'll talk about how I found something much bigger. A family." Isabella hesitated, worried about the potential consequences. "Are you sure? This could turn into a circus." "Yes, I am," Damian replied without hesitation. "Because in the end, it's not about them. It's about us. About showing that it's worth fighting for what truly matters." When the big day arrived, Damian stood before the cameras, surrounded by Isabella and the triplets. He took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment, but also a calmness he had never felt before. He began by talking about his journey, how he grew up in a world where success was synonymous with wealth and power, but how he discovered that those things were empty without love and connection. "I learned that true wealth is not in what you have, but in who you love," Damian declared, his voice firm and sincere. "And I want my children to grow up knowing this. I want them to know that a person's worth is not in the size of their bank account, but in the size of their heart." The words echoed through the hall, touching not only those present, but also those watching on television. For the first time, Damian wasn't trying to impress anyone. He was being honest, vulnerable, and that resonated deeply. Evelyn, watching from afar, realized she had lost. No matter how many scandals she created or how many lies she spread, Damian was no longer the man she once knew. He had changed, and there was no going back.